How does Congress assemble the evidence against the president?
Impeachment. I never thought I'd see or hear that word with regard to me.
The president is not above the law.
It's a very serious meltdown on the part of the president.
You've got your facts wrong.
Rudy Giuliani was seeking out corruption.
You just described as a quid pro quo.
We do that all the time.
This is not a game for us. This is deadly serious.
We do it all the time. Well, tonight, Donald Trump is closer to impeachment than ever before. Remarkable considering that right now, this weekend, we're actually less than a month out from when House Democrats first announced the formal impeachment probe. And what began with a single whistleblower worried about Trump pressuring a foreign leader for dirt on political rivals has exploded into a full investigation with dozens of hours of under-oath testimony from ambassadors and diplomats and a former top aide to Donald Trump himself. All of it revealing multiple accounts corroborating this controversial and potentially illegal shadow foreign policy run by, yes, Rudy Giuliani, focused on helping Donald Trump smear his political opponents and potentially build business profits for Mr. Giuliani. Now, the investigation, I could tell you, and I bet you know this, it's been not only moving fast, but it's also getting results. It's almost as if the 2 years of the Mueller probe have been condensed on an investigative timeline here into just a few weeks. And while Mueller did outline what he called substantial evidence of Donald Trump's obstruction of justice, this is a totally separate inquiry. And unlike the impeachment probes of, say, Nixon or Clinton, Congress there had a lot of help. Here, it's not on Ukraine relying on the work of separate special prosecutors. They say they're finding the facts themselves.
There is no special counsel investigation going on of the president's misconduct vis-a-vis Ukraine. None. Congress has to do it. And the reason there is none is because Bill Barr's Justice Department, when a referral was made to the Justice Department, said, there's nothing to see here. It has forced the Congress to do the initial investigative work that normally a special counsel would do.
And that investigative work is obviously happening. I want to bring in our panel, former federal judge Nancy Gertner, appointed to the bench by President Clinton, former U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer, who voted not guilty after trying the Clinton impeachment case, and former federal prosecutor Barrett Berger. She served at the SDNY, the same unit that Rudy Giuliani once ran, and whereas now he's facing investigation. Good evening to each of you.
Good evening.
We could start anywhere. I've just explained why each of you has such special expertise. Senator, I go to you first, having actually adjudicated this. What do you see as important about the evidence that Congress has been gathering here in just these few weeks? And how will the Senate look at it if they get this case?
I can't predict what my Republican friends will do in the Senate, but I only hope they listen to the evidence. This is very different than the impeachment trial I sat in on, which had to do with lying about, indiscretion, sexual indiscretion. And many people thought that was totally wrong, including me, that whole thing happened, but it didn't rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. Here, you're talking about...
You're saying, Senator, that,
yes,
that your criticism of the underlying conduct was separate from your view as a senator of whether it was a high crime.
Exactly. It's not what I think was meant by the founders. I think that what they were talking about is someone like Donald Trump who seizes power and doesn't understand the balance of power, the separation of power. And in this case, he is really self-impeached, as has been said before. It's very different. And I think they could come back with about 4 articles, here. Very, very different. And I would say that they would be obstruction of justice. I think Mueller laid that out. I would see obstruction of Congress, where they stopped funds going to Ukraine for some nefarious political purpose, campaign law violations. I mean, it goes on and on. The emoluments clause, just recently we heard, the president is proudly bringing the whole world of the G7 to where? Doral Country Club. There's no other place in the country that we could do but his country club, where he's going to make a ton of money. That's a violation of the emoluments clause. So I don't know whether the House is going to go all over that map. They may stick to 1 or 2 articles, but it's quite different than the trial I sat through.
Very interesting to hear you lay that out, and also your very well-informed thoughts about what the potential articles could be. Barrett, I want to put up on the screen for your analysis as a prosecutor all the people that the House has been gathering. Congressman Schiff saying, and we'll put this up here, look at you have the whistleblowers, you have the ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, you have Fiona Hill, who actually advised the president on international issues, George Kent, John Bolton, who's been quoted liberally for his rhetoric and criticism, and then the people who have yet to speak that you see who are particularly big on the right, Pompeo and Giuliani. Barrett, when you look at all of that together, how hard is it for the House to decide what to prioritize without, as Mr. Schiff says, a special counsel adjoining this, which is different from those other precedents?
Well, the central question of the entire inquiry here is, was the president abusing the office of the presidency when he made these inquiries to Ukraine? Was he trying to solicit help from a foreign country in our elections? We learned about all of this from that whistleblower initially. Every witness that has now come before Congress, at least the reporting that we've gotten, has just corroborated what that whistleblower has said. And these are not political people. These are career diplomats, public servants who don't come to this with any sort of a political agenda, who have come voluntarily and testified, and almost to a word have said things that just add support to what that whistleblower has said. These are exactly what prosecutors would want as sort of unimpeachable witnesses.
So you don't think they need that much more time?
Look, these are each, little pieces of a puzzle, and we don't know everything that they've said. They've been in closed session, so we haven't seen the full report of their testimony. I can't say, when enough is enough without having the benefit of seeing everything they've said. But what I do think you have is a lot of building blocks here that are putting the Democrats in a very strong position to put their best case forward to the Senate. Yeah,
you mentioned the closed session, which is, of course, an interesting part of this. Judge, I want you to stay with me as I get deeper into that, because Barrett brought it up, which is this notable aspect of House impeachment so far is how little of it we've seen. Take a look.
George Kent testified about the Three Amigos meeting in his under oath closed door deposition.
This in a closed door hearing. She is supposed to be appearing any minute for a closed door deposition.
Closed door, but some Republicans have said that's a problem. They want everything public immediately. Chairman Schiff, who we just heard from, says he will eventually plan to release most of the depositions as well as holding public hearings. But for this opening round, he's explaining why they're keeping some of it out of the public eye.
There is a profound investigative, not only interest, but need to make sure that one witness does not have an opportunity to read another witness's testimony and either hide the truth or color the truth.
I'm sure the White House would like nothing more than to be able to get their story straight by hearing what these witnesses have to say.
A strategy laid out to avoid people participating in a coordinated cover-up. Now, sometimes the loudest committees are, of course, not as effective. Remember the House Benghazi Committee? Boy, it was a lot of public hearings, but nobody thinks, even they don't claim, they got a lot done when it came to changing government policy. The quiet approach has other precedents. In American history, the only impeachment process that, of course, led to a president's ouster, we all know, was Nixon. The House Judiciary Committee worked on the articles of impeachment, but those hearings were closed for months.
We interrupt our regular program schedule to bring you the following NBC News special report. The House Judiciary Committee hearings on impeachment begin today.
And by 31-6, the committee voted that the first session be closed.
And the chair will now announce that the committee will go into recess until the television cameras and other equipment which is not allowed.
With the impeachment inquiry about to close at the end of July, it appears there will be no television coverage of any of the proceedings.
Get the cameras out of here. Whatever those of us who work with cameras think about it, well, the Judiciary Committee did ultimately, once they gathered evidence, bring TV cameras back in to cover the final days of the debate. But it wasn't until after the Supreme Court had forced Nixon's hand turning over the Watergate tapes, and after key Republicans on the committee decided and said they were going to push forward, that you had this action. The closed-door private hearings, according to what we've seen in history, are clearly one effective way to do an impeachment probe. Judge, I want to bring you in on that and ask you about the precedent and what you think is effective.
Well, I mean, it's making it look more like a grand jury, which is sort of what the House process is. within a grand jury, it's not just a question of keeping each witness from copying the other witness's testimony. By the way, I mean, we've seen enough hearings that have become political grandstanding to understand that this may well be, we hope, a workmanlike way of addressing this. In addition, you're trenching on national security issues, so that would make sense to keep it like this. I know that the Republicans have criticized this process, but under the Constitution, frankly, the House makes its own rules. And it's anticipated that when there are articles of impeachment that come out of the committee, then everything will become public. But I actually think that this is an impressive way to proceed, so you don't have people grandstanding, as we have seen.
We have seen some of that. I think viewers remember some hearings being more enlightening than others. Judge, do you think there is substantial evidence here, even though it is, of course, different than a federal courtroom, but substantial evidence for the House to move forward?
I think that there's no doubt of that. The July 25th call really on its own suggests that the soliciting of a foreign government to help in an election. There's no question about that. And then in addition, there is certainly circumstantial evidence, and even in the four corners of that call, to suggest a quid pro quo. The president's comments about a quid pro quo really reminded me of the trials I sat in, where the drug dealer somehow believed that if he didn't say crack on the phone, he couldn't be prosecuted. There is what the president said. There is the reference to the election and I have a favor, comma, though. A favor from the president of Ukraine, comma, though. And then there's now circumstantial evidence. He didn't have to say, do this or I'm going to break your arm. What's also ironic here is that I think that Rudy Giuliani, who prosecuted many people in the Southern District of New York for like conduct, understands that these kinds of things are rarely explicit. I surely think there's enough.
It's striking to hear you say that as a federal judge. You brought up crack. I wonder whether there is something here about people being too close to the alleged infraction to realize how bad it is. You said, oh, well, maybe someone who deals crack thinks they could just avoid the key word and be okay. And Judge and then Senator, I'm curious, when you look at the president's own chief of staff who deals with the money of the United States as budget director, and who then comes out this week, late in the week, and admits, yes, we conditioned the money on getting a political probe, admitting the core of the bribe. Judge and then Senator, how do you make sense of that kind of public confession?
Well, it is a public confession. I think there's a brazenness about it. I mean, if you read the rest of what he said was, elections have consequences. And, gee, we condition aid on all sorts of things. Well, it's different to condition aid on you cleaning up your atmosphere or you dealing with this national policy and saying, I'm going to condition aid on you doing something for me personally, you doing something for my campaign. It was almost as if he didn't understand that there was a difference between the two. It's fascinating to hear you analyze that. Senator, your view?
Yes. Well, number one, I don't think we should forget that you cannot get anything of value from a foreigner, let alone a foreign country. That in itself is against campaign law. So I agree. It was a quid pro quo. He said, I have a favor, though, the president said to Zelensky. And so we have to know on its face. Look, I ran many campaigns, 12, and I paid a lot for opposition research. You want to know what's in the background of your opponent. But you can't take 50 cents from any foreign person or someone who isn't a citizen. So on its face, and obviously, this is an abuse of power to turn to this president of a country that is in desperate need of help because Russia's attacking his country. Last point I'd make here. We also can't forget that the Inspector General who looked at the whistleblower report said, this is urgent. Right. This is serious. And he was a Trump appointee. This thing is inexorable. We are marching down the road. I'll tell you something. Sitting through the impeachment trial of Clinton was the most painful thing, honestly, for so many, including myself. It went on and on and on. It's very difficult. It's very serious. It's very old-fashioned because really most of the rules were set way back in 1868 when Andrew Johnson was impeached and then he was not convicted. So it's it's a very somber thing,
Yeah,
as
well-
Nancy Pelosi has said.
And
She
Senator,
didn't
let me
want
play a
to
little
do
bit
it,
of
but
you.
she has to do it.
You mentioned that. We pulled a little bit of you in that last Clinton impeachment. Johnson, we actually have more on that with a historian later this very hour. But here you were talking about how important it was after the evidence was gathered to have a public reckoning in the Senate. Take a look.
It may be, by anybody's account, the most important vote any senator here will cast. After all, we're talking about the possible overturning of an election. I feel the people have a right to hear our reasoning.
A right to hear the Senate's reasoning. How do you view that applying in the obligations of the Senate, of Mitch McConnell, if they get this impeachment, if it does go there, how they do the case?
It's absolutely critical. And under the rules, the way we did it, was very, very professionally done. I'm sure the judge would agree with this. First of all, you have the Supreme Court justice. He's the head of the Supreme Court. He is the chief, and he is presiding over this whole thing. And then you have the House managers, and they literally march in, and they take their seats. And then you have the defense counsel. And senators can raise points of order. But really, senators have to be pretty quiet, which is also very hard for senators.
I can
tell you that. So it's a very, very serious, somber time.
Yeah.
And yes, the senator's judgment is critical here because we are going to decide, they are going to decide, whether or not the president should leave office.
Well, and as you say, there's no joy in that, no matter what people want to see happen, which brings me to the final question to Barrett. I want to get you back in. Take a look at the Republican talking about, who's managing the Nixon impeachment, talking about what he felt he had to do to the president and his own party.
The misuse of power is the very essence of tyranny. But the evidence is clear and direct and convincing to me. I would be less than candid if I did not now say that my present inclination is to support articles incorporating my view as to the charges of obstruction of justice and abuse of power. But there will be no joy in it for me.
No joy. How pivotal is it that the House clearly enunciate, if they do this, why they're doing it? You heard the congressman there talk about abuse of power and obstruction.
I think it's critical. I think just like any juror would probably tell you who sat on a criminal case, there is no joy in sitting in judgment on somebody else. There's no joy in having to pass that sort of condemnation. So I can imagine that the senators would feel no joy in having to sit through this kind of a process. And that is why it is critical for the House to really show this not as a one-off phone call. If this is only about one phone call, I don't think they're going to get very far. What they have to do is show this phone call as part of a greater pattern of an abuse of power. That will be the key to convincing senators to take the action that they may want to do, but they'll only be convinced if they can see this as part of a broader picture.
Barrett Berger, thank you. Senator Boxer, Judge Gertner, really great to have so much expertise on this important topic. Thanks to each of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.